welcome back to Fans of Fandom, the Dark Ages of DC. This is where we do a deep dive into particularly emotionally traumatic stories from the late 80s, early 90s so far in DC. I'm Dr. Eric Wesselmann, social psychologist and full-time nerd, and is my co-host, Mr. Victor Dandridge Jr.
Well, hello. Victor Dandridge, the hardest working man in comics here, self-publishing writer through Vantage and House Productions, and phenomenological narratologist through You Create Comics. I've actually decided I'm going to make a t-shirt that phonetically says phenomenological narratologist so that people can be like, oh, that's how you say that thing. Yeah, I'm going to need that.
Excellent. So in this current series, we are doing a deep dive into the Funeral for a Friend storyline. And so our special guest for this particular portion of the arc is grief specialist, Dr. Brittani Oliver Sillas Navarro. Brittani, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I'm a grief researcher out in San Diego. I specialize with transitional age youth, so 16 to 25. And like the doctor said, I am a grief researcher, and I'm so excited to be here and like to talk about sad things, as usual.
It's the joy of which you said that. I like to talk about sad things. Yay!
It's the best.
I love it.
Doctor, we are pleased to have you.
Absolutely.
And since we are talking about sad things, I usually say this, I post this in the comments as well. But there are, if something comes up during this conversation that triggers you, makes you think about something you want to talk to someone about, please do call 988. That's the National Suicide and Crisis Prevention Hotline. Also, if you go to Psychology Today's website, they have a nice handy little tool where you can type in your zip code and find out all the therapists near you, what their specialties are they in person or virtual, and what insurance they take, which is sadly also important. So those are resources that you have. Please do avail yourself of them. Okay, so the next issue we are going to talk about now is Superman 76, which takes place right after the funeral. I'm going to put the call up, the cover for the previous issue, though, here, just because I think that's important for context, because we talked a lot about last time how this is the official funeral issue. We talked about the arrangement and the inclusion of the heroes and why we thought they were there. Although this is technically a multi-DC title event, with the exception of JLA and then these particular issues, this one and the next one, there isn't a lot of tie-in among the other stories. Most of the stories in the DC universe are pretty self-contained. But this next issue, which is sort of an ensemble cast, I have my thoughts on these two next to each other, but I want to throw it out to my esteemed colleagues here to see what they pick out.
You want to jump in first, Brittany, or you want me to nerd out?
You nerd out first.
Oh, I'm a nerd out. I'm a nerd out. So one of the first things to note here, of course, is the positioning of the camera. Right. So with the first one, with Superman Man of Steel, number 20, you have more of a bird's eye view, which you're looking into a situation or a moment, which kind of creates a natural storytelling essence of either anxiety or anticipation. Right. Because you're in a position where the figures that you're looking at are not aware of you watching them. Right. And so either in a way of expected surprise with anticipation that you're going to either reveal yourself to them or see something that you're quote unquote not necessarily invited to see, and obviously in this memorial kind of moment that kind of is what is played out here. I hate the term, but it's kind of a looking over the stall kind of moment where, again, the person that is within the space is having their own situation occupied, however, and you're looking in on them uninvited, unintended, but still able to see. On the flip side of it, we have a worm's eye view for Superman 76, which naturally creates a feeling of grandeur or imposition by the figures that you're looking at. They seem larger than life. They are big and imposing. And what we have here in this moment of all these characters looking down at us like with the essence of the drop cape is a moment of reverence that feels bigger and more dynamic than the other one, which feels more personal. It's smaller in its presentation because we're not invited into the space, whereas we are almost the target of their perspective in Superman 76. Not to mention the collection of heroes that you see here. It's a little bit different than what you had on the other one. There are characters that aren't in the other cover, and what do they represent? There's aspects of different variations of the Justice League that are there, Teen Titans that are there. There's different things that like if we look at Crimson Fox, who was kind of hidden behind Batman's cowl or cape. Crimson Fox is a member of Justice League International, Justice League Europe at the time. You have Power Girl, who has a very weird storied history that sometimes connects with Superman, sometimes doesn't. But her presence there is a matter of power, things like that. So you have all these different attributes of things that are very different from Superman Man of Steel number 20 than this one. Batman and Robin are part of the group. In the other one, they're clearly separated, not necessarily associated like everybody else is. And for Batman's constant reserve status within the Justice League, that's a big, statement to have him with everybody as a unified front of heroes that are leading the way. You also have the statement or sentiment that with Superman gone, Batman is the number one superhero of all time in this moment. One could argue at the time Batman was still on top, in general in pop culture. I mean, he had the latest movie release at this time. I think he had two. Returns should have been out by this time as well. So also could be another reason why Batman takes center stage. It's more of a flag of pop cultural relevance for the time period. So Batman is moving up, Superman has died and is kind of like falling away. Again, the top tier being mostly I don't want to call them C-listers, that's not fair, but it is kind of true. They are the lesser grade heroes, whereas the lower tier has a little bit more higher functioning popular characters like Wonder Woman, like Flash, like Green Lantern. I would not have put Aquaman down there under that auspice, but he's technically part of the Big Seven. If you were to consider the idea of the Super Friends, he would be one of those guys. Nightwing was definitely always popular, despite being a former Robin. Definitely would have been in that space. Guardian, I don't know if I would have put him down there either in terms of popularity, but he has relevance to the Superman story from Death of Superman into Funeral for a Friend. So there is some acceptability for him to be there with context of the storytelling. But that's some of the biggest like showcases of difference between those two covers and what they both signify in terms of storytelling and intentionality.
Yeah, I think that bottom tier, maybe you already said this and I missed it, but that bottom tier, they're in number 3. All of
Yes.
them are.
Yes.
But none of the ones at the top are, I don't think.
Right. Which
Did
is very
you say that?
interesting. I did not say that specifically, but
Okay.
so Shazam, Captain Marvel is on both, right? Even though he's a top tier, he's on both. But
Okay. Oh yes, you're right. Sorry, I missed him.
yeah. But I mean,
Yes,
but that's kind of the thing is at the time, especially, you do kind of miss him. Like he has always played second fiddle to Superman post DC's acquisition of him. So you miss him. You do.
Yeah. But and there's like as you were talking, I was like trying to ingest what you said, but also having these two next to each other. Every time I look at these covers, I see something different. I'll hold on to a couple of those for a bit, but a couple things I wanted to riff on what you said. Batman, so yes, he was on top. I've done a lot of looking at, for example, what was the Diamond Top 10 selling around this time, also a year or two before and a year or two after, because I'm interested in how the marketing and how the story boosted. And yeah, Batman was consistently the 3 or 4 titles that they had for him were always on top, certainly for DC.
Right.
And usually it was that, a couple Image things, and X-Men
Yep.
during this time. But so this, of course, the storyline did not only put Superman further up, but moved him to the top.
Right.
But we'll come back to this. Who's going to take over the mantle? I also wanted to talk. I loved your points about the eyes in these things, because yeah, in both cases they're looking down, but in one they're looking at us. The Eisner terms that you reference in terms of angles, right? The bird's eye view and the worm's eye view. they're called slightly differently, but they also, those ideas show up in film theory as well. And one of the things that film theorists often talk about is the emotions or the way we're supposed to see the characters, right? So when it's bird's eye view or sometimes God's eye view, if it's really, really cranked up there, it's supposed to make them, film theorists argue, make those characters look emotionally weaker. And perhaps if it's high enough to get into the God's eye view, it starts making us feel detached. So we could discuss how much we think that's going on here.
Yeah.
Certainly, I think the emotional gravitas of them, these powerful beings being, sort of stuck in that moment is there. What usually the low angle view or the worm's eye view from film theorist perspective is it makes these characters seem powerful, right? And so you said reverence with all those characters, and I love that, because definitely they all looking down and looking sad. Batman always throws me here though, because you can't see his face.
Right.
He's dropping the tattered cloak, and so I'm like, what's going on behind that cowl, behind that shadowed facade here? I still don't know.
I mean, that's definitely hard to decipher, because it almost looks like he's throwing Superman away, and how disrespectful that he's doing it at the Daily Planet, which, like, he knew that that's where Superman worked. So, like, an even more of a, like, forget you, man, like, kind of move. Like, it could definitely be read that way. And hand on the hip, like, I mean, he's got like a definitive pose, whereas everyone else is a little bit more stoic, or like you said, saddened. Maxima would probably be the next person that has something a little bit more I don't know, contentious, but that's Maxima though. Like, that's her personality as a warrior queen. She looks at death as something a little different, constantly on the basis of, like, man, like, he died well, and everyone else will be like, but he died. She's like, yeah, but it was great. Like, yes, you see how he died? Like, that was awesome. Everyone else has a very different take. I'm sorry?
A heroic death.
Yes, yes. She would turn around like, that's why I liked him. Like, that's, the way he died is why, I wanted that. But Batman does seem like maybe it's a way of letting go. But it does seem very callous.
Can I jump in for grief stuff?
Always.
Yes, no, that's what I was about to say. Brittany, tell us about
because I was thinking about the two different covers, and what comes up for me is present versus future. And so when you're in the grieving space, and when you're doing these very Western world grief traditions, like having a funeral and being very present, is being lost in the moment of being really sucked in. And so I feel like this is that intimacy that we get from the first cover, whereas in the second, it's now like tomorrow is going to come. Someone has to step up, and this like callousness that Batman might be showing, or perhaps be showing, being like, maybe I'm the one to do it. And what immediately comes to my mind is like, who's going to pull the plug on grandma? Who's going to be the one that like actually like steps in and decides, like, I know that we're all hurting, I know that everyone's life has changed, but someone's got to take over. And because, like I said, tomorrow's got to come, and the world needs saving. And so when I look at the juxtaposition of them, I see a lot of, we're allowed to mourn in this space, especially as a very grief-phobic country and ideology. They're giving them the opportunity to be having a similar experience as the world, whereas the second cover is saying, okay, now we have to move. Now we have to make decisions. Now the story goes on, and everyone's story gets to go on. And so I think that that's how I see it, but it's really truly in the eye of the eye of the beholder, right? Like, because it could be I'm throwing this away, it could be I'm overcoming something so other people can't, it could be a lot of different variations of the expression of grief, which is normal and natural, because everyone's going to handle it and respectfully deal with it differently.
I love that.
I love those points you make there about these sort of the spectrum of grief for individuals.
Yeah.
And how that might change, especially not just an individual, but the situation they find themselves in, right? So you gave an example of a family dynamic, right? And for a family to exist as a unit, to get through what it needs to, there's going to be pre-existing dynamics. And there also might be situations where someone says, okay, now's the time where I got to step in and take charge, maybe it'll be you next week when I'm hurting.
Yeah.
And then you also to talk about Western culture, right? And Victor brought up Maxima's warrior culture from Almerac, or yeah, from her planet. Culture, individuals have multiple cultural backgrounds, and all these things are going to weave in together to influence how we're experiencing grief at any one time.
Sure. And if you think about it too, like there are gains for him being gone for some people. Like now I get to express myself, be who I want to be more powerful, be more present. Like it's not that the whole world was, I mean, just in this specific situation, it's not like everyone was, I mean, everyone sure was like, oh, we lost this enormous person, but now this is where we flourish in a lot of stories. And Batman might be like, hey, this is my time. Like this is like I'm a sports person, like, your star player blows at a knee. Sucks, but
Here comes that number 2 guy.
yeah.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely
It
right.
sucks, sucks, and it happened.
Right.
Yeah.
And you can't reverse that.
Right.
Normally, right? I mean, this is comics, and
Yes.
death ever
Absolutely.
really death, and that's kind of amorphous. But in the
Yeah.
real world, right? I mean, these things happen. They're catastrophic. They shatter our identities and our meaning, our worldviews. But as you mentioned, Brittany, for better or for worse, the story has to go on. And so, what do we do with that, right? And I think we're going to see that in the next few issues. I look forward to bringing this back definitely to the grief stuff to figure out what are the ways, for example, that people do that.
You know what? Before we move away from that, I kind of want to look at, based on these characters, their presentation of grief and how much of the trauma of loved ones or what have you is integrated into their stories, as to any sort of insight as to how they actually addressed what this is. So like Batman, as a young person who watched his parents die through villainous intent, has a long storied history of trauma and dealing with the death of loved ones. Like that is the foundation of his presentation as Batman. Interestingly, there's different like points of characters that could, should, might have similar points of view. Bloodwind, spoiler, is another character in disguise who, once you find out who that is, has a long, history with grief and death of loved ones, but we don't know that yet. So there's almost like a wall where, ironically, you could say that Bloodwind could very well be the dominant voice when it comes to dealing with grief, but because we don't know the reveal yet, we can't say that about that character yet. So there's an interesting sort of place there with Power Girl. And again, the crazy storyline of whether or not she's Kryptonian, Atlantean, there's all kinds of like craziness when it comes to her origin story. So maybe there's a separation there where if she's Kryptonian, yes, she lost Krypton, possibly from a different Earth of Krypton. So like it's way crazier. But again, there's still like this ambiguousness to her storyline. So you don't really know exactly how things fit. Looking at all these different characters, it's so very interesting to kind of take it that way. Billy Batson as Captain Marvel Shazam also lost his parents at a young age, but he's still just a little kid. So he hasn't had the time of dealing with it like Batman has. Dick Grayson lost his parents, but then at the same time got a new parental structure with the adoption of Bruce and the additive of Alfred. So while his parenting structure was taken, he got a different one. So it's so very interesting to see, based on these characters and their individual stories, what sort of presentation of grief they might actually be noted for. Batman is probably the most noted character here to address grief, recognize it, and turn it into something versus everybody else, which I think is very, very interesting, and possibly another telling piece as to why he's the center of that.
At this time, Aquaman had lost his son.
Had he lost him yet, or does that come?
They actually, I can't remember if it's this issue or the JLA tie-in,
Okay.
where he makes a brief reference
Okay.
to his son being murdered by Black Manta.
By Black Manta, yeah.
So it's sort of silhouette. That's
Okay.
it, right? And not many people are reading Aquaman.
It
right?
is also true. Also true. Peter David was doing good stuff though.
So I'll move to the splash page, getting into the issue, because I think it ties in nicely with the ambiguity, perhaps, or how we're reading the passing of the flag here, the Superman cape. This is called Metropolis Mailbag 2, right? So there was a previous issue called Metropolis Mailbag where you find out that Superman made it every Christmas he would answer letters and try to do as much good to answer those letters as he could. And so this is them all getting together at that time. And I love the splash page here where it's, again, you're looking down, right? You've got Captain Marvel, Shazam coming in. You've got the rain, which I've always associated, just because of my own grief experiences, rain and snow with grief. And I also want to pull out here this thing at the top. We don't generally get a lot of reference to when these events happen, aside from the snow. But here it very explicitly says this is Christmas Eve. For most, it's a time of happiness, cheer, and goodwill. But for these people who are grieving, it's a different story. And I want to move that to Brittani. Talk about grief in the holidays, because this issue and the next issue are where you get that centering.
Sure. Any type of anniversary, regardless if it's Mother's Day, Father's Day, if it's a special holiday that you have, like if it's Thanksgiving and maybe Easter was like your day that you do like a lot of family traditions, that something comes up, a parent's birthday, all of those are going to trigger different points of just like grief experiences. And I don't know if you guys can guess, when is the 2 highest times that people get hospitalized in America?
I would say definitely Christmas and like 4th of July.
Perfect guess. So it's holidays and summer.
Oh, okay. All right.
Holidays because it's tightly attached to family and family dynamics, and then summer because it's hot. And people are erratic and sometimes have erratic behavior, and sometimes they're upset. And so this point that it's like, one, here's this thing that he did selfishly, like during the holidays. And not only is it a reminder that, oh, here's this thing that this person was kind and compassionate. Now this evolves into our story. So not just this year it's important, is it going to be important years to come? So is this something that we're going to do to continue to have him around, or will this dwindle? And I think that that's kind of an interesting idea of, well, yeah, it's really easy to do it now, but am I going to make a commitment to this man and to his legacy to have this thing be important enough to me? Because as people fade away, and I do truly mean fade away from our lives, figuratively and literally, there's a death, and how often are you going to continue these rituals? And what does it mean to you 1, 2, 10, 20 years down the line? Like self-disclosure, my parents passed away March 1st and March 4th. So that's my like sad week. And during that time, I always have some ritual. And so am I going to do this for the rest of my life? Probably, but I know that it feels different every single year. And so how many heroes are going to show up year after year after year and make this meaningful and make this special? Who knows? But the holidays specifically, especially if it's important to your family, are going to affect you differently year to year based off of the community that you have that supports you. So say, for example, you don't have many people, maybe you're orphaned, maybe you have very few social supports or things of that nature. This loss is going to hit you harder in 3 years, which instead of, if you have a lot of social support, you have a lot of love, you have a community that fights for you, that loves you, that really understands you, that you could have a conversation with, like that's going to be different and look different grief wise during the holidays because you have community. So right now, great. But what happens in the future? Who knows?
I love this connection of this idea of ritual and
Mhm.
and holidays, which are all tied into rituals generally anyway, not necessarily specifically ones that are about mourning.
Mhm.
But you've got the connection to others who are
Mhm.
sharing your pain, right? I mean, for it says right there at the top, for these people saddened at the loss of a man they call friend, it's time for grief, right? So they are getting together both to connect with Superman, to honor that relationship and maintain some type of connection
Mhm.
with this person who is now gone from their lives, and to do it together.
Well, and I'd also like to point out, let's say they do this to honor him. If they
Mhm,
continue it, they
mhm,
continue this narrative that this is important, are they doing it for him? Or are they doing it for the community?
Right.
Or are they doing it for themselves? And the answer can be all three. The answer can be two or one. And
mhm,
so I'm doing, like, I'm sure the motivation behind this specifically is we are honoring this person and we're respecting the community that is at a loss.
mhm.
And then down the road, it's going to turn into, hmm, and do I feel like this is coming truly from me, or do I feel like this is obligation because I'm supposed to be some very selfless hero that really, wants to honor this person?
Think that there's also something super symbiotic that has to be addressed with this particular iteration of the ritual. What they are essentially going to be doing is reading mail that was intended for Superman, and it becomes a community gesture of how many people a year from now or from this date would continue writing letters to Superman after he has been gone. Like,
Mm,
is this a dwindling sort of ritual because the thing that they're actively doing hinges on community involvement of resources, and theoretically those resources should kind of diminish over time unless there are people that under the same auspice want
mhm,
to consistently write a letter about Superman in memorial, like, to him, and then they read it and respond or whatever. But it is potentially something on a very symbiotic basis that as less people write in to this, there is less need for them to actualize in this ritual that way. And that becomes a very interesting thing too. Could that ever breed any resentment amongst these guys
Oh,
where, like, oh, y'all gonna stop writing letters now? Like, really? Like, and would that be understood? I don't want to say justified because I think that's inappropriate, but would that be understood if they said anything about it, invoked anything about it? Like, what would that look like in terms of a grief structure? And would anyone else recognize that that is just a continuation of their grief?
well, and then God, you're amazing. Like, it makes me think of like celebrity culture. Like,
Yes.
here is this person that I idolize, but at some point they're gonna be gone. And
Mhm.
so when do the letters stop coming? And if they do they not have faith in this thing that happened? Do they not support it anymore? Do they not care?
Right.
Is it no longer meaningful? Or better yet, I'll say this, is it no longer meaningful when the last letter comes?
Mm.
mm.
Mm. Oh, I'm gonna hold on to that one. That one. Ooh. Yeah. Yeah.
So, like, because I mean, journaling or writing to a deceased loved one is an intervention in grief therapy. It just is. Because it gives you an opportunity, even if you don't get a response, you do get a call. But yeah, like it's interesting to think about. 'Cause, like there's like there is some belief it's like, the last that you cease to exist when the last person who knows your name lives.
Right.
And so that's that letter part, right?
Mhm.
It's like, so what happens if all of them come in 10 years and there's no letters? So do they just then start writing people? Do they just stop doing it? Like, what? It's a really difficult question. So that was beautiful, Victor.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It's
I,
you set the stage. I'm just saying.
I wonder if that's similar to how at the interpersonal level, right? Like we've had not just this time, but previous sessions too, we've talked about this idea of the world, quote unquote, going on, right?
Mhm.
For the bereaved, generally it sort of feels like it stops, or time is a little bit more, flex than that, because
Mhm.
yeah, things but this idea of being sort of emotionally arrested, right? And people are there at the beginning, but by and large, most of the research suggests eventually social support dwindles off for various reasons, right? I think it can be very easy to assume, just I'll talk personally now. I've been in those situations and I have been like, what, do people not care anymore? Right. And when I'm emotionally distanced from that part of myself, I can stop and say, no, they still do care. It's just life is complicated, right? And lots of things have to go on. But in that moment, it can feel like I've been forgotten and my pain has been forgotten.
I think that is one of the hardest realities of the social context of individuality versus community, where, you know, again, the thing that matters to you almost can't matter as much to outside things. And having that understanding is a big deal. As we're all sharing personal things. I think I might have talked about it in a previous episode. So my mother passed this last April, and that week not only was my birthday, but was a Comic-Con in her hometown in Cleveland, Ohio that I went to. And there was a sensibility to me that I definitely got to go to work, right? Like there's not an excuse factor that I can use and be like, oh, my mom died, I'm not going. Like, one, that's not what my mother would have wanted. She would have wanted me to see that life continues on and recognize that in her lifetime, I had achieved and accomplished things that I should continue reaching for in spite of her passing. That's not a reason to stop reaching. And one of the greatest things that happened to me during that weekend was I saw a good friend of mine who is a fellow creator who said that his mother had passed like the year or so before. And for 2 weeks, he couldn't get out of bed. And the idea that I was not like languishing at home, but I'm at a show, big smiles, celebrating a cultural thing. He was like, that's so inspirational. And it's not that, you know, my mom doesn't matter. In fact, my presentation of being there and everything about it was so very personal to my stake of how I was going to remember my mother. It becomes something very interesting to not fall victim to your personal ideal being what other people or what standards you hold other people to. You know, just because I was, you know, almost built to be able to have this situation happen and keep moving forward doesn't give me the right to look down on anybody that can't do that, that wouldn't do that. That is just a me thing. And that is a very interesting sort of shroud that I think people get lost in their own grief, that under traditional circumstances, they would be far more comfortable. Like, nah, you feel that way. I get it. I totally get it. But because of the shroud of grief, how I see it is almost difficult, if not impossible, to apply your perspective to the situation. I can only see it through mine. And I think that is one of those powerful pieces that as you get through grief, that is one of the telltales is when you are able to kind of see things from other people's perspective about that thing and not just your own. That's when I think you're kind of further in that tunnel where you go, I get how I feel, but I also get how you feel. And whether they're congruent or not, it's okay.
I love that part because one of the things I had the question of, and when you were saying that is, you know, as we've talked about, and Brittany's made a point, the idea that grief is different, right, for everyone, and then that changes not just between among people, but within a person, right? So this story you told, Victor, about this person being inspired, you know, that you know they would have been 2 weeks in bed and you weren't. Not about now. My question is not about the specific person now, but more the general idea. What would happen though if a month or two later you found yourself in a state where you needed to languish? How would other people respond then if their idea was, well, languishing makes sense early on, but it doesn't after? I don't know. Brittany,
Oh, so what's the average? So what's the average length of the grief cycle? Right? So in any kind of like complicated grief or complex grief, it's about 12 to 18 months. And it's going to ebb and flow in that 12 and 18 months. Some people get hit hard early. It's kind of, I would almost equate it similar to like postpartum depression. Some people get it right away. Some people get it later. And so at any time it's going to wax and wane, but really up to 3 to 5 years, you kind of are going to cycle, depending on anniversaries, depending on your social supports, depending on your psychological agility, your emotional agility. So many things are factors into it, because like somebody who is down on their luck, just lost a job, just lost a parent, maybe have issues with their relationship, like that person's not going to necessarily be as equipped to manage their own experience and stress and grief, as opposed to somebody who has a lot more support. So in life be life in.
Yes, it
So
do.
there, and one of my sister's favorite, one of my favorite quotes from my sister is people, people.
Mhm.
And so there are going to be times in which you're going to be more resilient. And like resilience is, I mean, we're all our own little special snowflakes of resilience. We all have different levels of it. Victor, you might be 80% resilient. Eric, you
Mhm.
might be 38, and I might be 22. Who knows? And so every experience is going to affect us differently. Therefore, our grief during the duration of how we experience it is going to look different. And so like Victor's example of, hey, like I could get up and get around. Like I remember after my dad passed, I like wore my best outfit to school on Monday. I think he
Mhm.
passed on Friday, and then was dressed up on Monday. And then after my mom, it was like not okay. So it really, and it changes based off of the relationship you have with the person, the mode of death with the person, like um so many different factors, the cultural factors of how you grieve, your previous experiences of loss. There are so many systemic things that occur when you're trying to conceptualize what grief is. Like, I mean, you can do twin studies and see differences of
Yes.
the loss experience, because you're in the same home, you're parented in theory by the same parents, but you're
Mhm.
not, because they might talk to you differently, attune to you differently, build a relationship with you differently, because maybe one is very sensitive and kind and compassionate and needs more support, and one's more bullheaded and strong-willed and
Yep.
doesn't need as much. Like there are so many factors that lay into it, and that's why grief work is pretty tricky, because not only is the individual who you're treating different, but they can be different day to day, week to week, and the relationship they have with the person is independent of so many factors that are going to influence the grief experience. Whoa, I nerded out. I was like,
No, no, no. Feed that. Feed that. That's that goodness right there. Yes, yes, yes. Yes, yes. I think one of the things that I have as a claim to fame is a self-awareness enough where I told people that, especially during that week or that weekend, let me be very specific, because again, the highs and lows of one, it being my birthday weekend and the week that my mother passed, like there was a crazy mix of things. And I openly told people I have not had that crash yet, but I'm open to when it comes. So if it does this weekend, like forgive me if I interrupt your moment, if I, it's where I am. Like respectfully, it's where I am. It's got nothing to do with you. It is about me. And in that in that ability of self-awareness and almost open selfishness, because again, if I have to take that moment, if we're in the midst of me interviewing a celeb and I got to run off stage, I got to run off stage and I'm doing it. Okay. Like be mad at me if you want to. And trust and believe, once it's explained, you might feel like an asshole because you're mad at me. But, because that's the other thing is that, again, in recognizing what the situation was, circumstance, I didn't go in and tell anybody, celeb wise or anybody that I worked with, what the situation was. Upper management of the show knew, because I felt like that was my responsibility to tell them, but it was also my responsibility to try my best to manage my emotions to do my job. But if it did, understandably become overwhelming, then I also had told upper management, like, hey, if I have a reaction, I'll do my best, but I'm a person. And, if I got to excuse myself, I got to excuse myself. And if that's a problem for you, then I'll let you tell me that I can't come versus I'm going to elect not to come. Like I think there's something um, very beautiful about having that sense of self-awareness. And I think that's ultimately where so many people kind of clash when they aren't given the freedom to say, hey, I'm going to try to get through this as best as I can, but if I don't, please don't hold that against me, because that's when you get this false resiliency of either I'm totally going to give in and I'm not even going to try, or if I do break and you look at me a certain kind of way, then I'm gonna fight and I'm gonna feel so like uptight and try not to reveal how I feel. That is just as bad to me. So again, meeting it head on, because it is, life is lifing, and you have to embrace that part and allow people to people, because that's a part of life. It's
Yeah.
beautiful.
I'm going to use that moment to transition actually to our next page, because I think we're going to see some of the dynamics you were talking about there among a couple different folks. So here, this was, I have the whole page here. And I'll do my best to kind of read the parts out there because it might be hard to read, right? This is all in Lois's head, right? This is those of course it's not in the thought bubbles either. It's a
Captions.
voiceover,
Yeah.
captions, right? And so Lois is walking to Clark's apartment. She doesn't want to go. She says, "I don't want to go, but I have to." Each step takes more and more effort. The doorman, try not to cry. The world mustn't know. Daddy always said, don't cry. She then gets in the elevator, talking more about the experience of time being the elevator ride takes forever, but ends too soon. And she intersperses within these thoughts, don't cry. She then prays, I'm alone, so terribly alone. And here's where we first get to see her face, right? Before, we didn't get to see her face. It was in shadow when she was wreathed by the Christmas wreath, right? Well, again, a reminder of the holiday time. But that lower right panel, I think most of us have probably found ourselves there at some point.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think the inner monologue of it all creates such a beautiful tapestry of emotion, right? She is doing something that she feels she has to do, but she openly doesn't want to. And she's already addressing that truth, which I think that Lois Lane is one of the greatest characters in the world to deal with truth. The only person I think that confronts it better is Wonder Woman. And they're literally two sides of the same coin in so many different ways. Lois being the one that is like, okay, here are truths. Like I don't want to be here, but I gotta be here. Don't cry in front of the doorman, because the doorman actually doesn't know the totality of her grief. At best, Clark Kent is missing, like not pronounced dead. There is no body. There is no crime. Like that, there is nothing to say that Clark is dead. And in fact, if she does give away that Clark might be dead, she might not be allowed to go in there. Like they might have to have different protocols. Somebody died. Oh, hold on. You can't come up here until we notify XYZ, blah, blah, blah. So many different truths that are at play in that moment, let alone the fact that she can't tell him Clark Kent was Superman and Superman died and Clark died too. I can't tell you that. I know that, and I have to do everything that I can to take what I know, what I feel, hold it in, like I was just talking about, which is crazy, and not express it in a way that opens the door for me to tell you more than I'm supposed to. That's tough. Again, that is such a balancing act. And then you get into the idea of, on a cultural level, she was raised, don't cry. Why? What does crying reveal? It reveals a sense of weakness. Her dad is a career military guy. He's a general, and there's a gruffness to him, and there's a man's man kind of idea, let alone a man's man who's raised two girls, doesn't have a son. So what he imparts as a matter of strength is arguably misogynistic in a way. It's gender specific, but he's playing it out to a woman to tell her, no, don't cry, because maybe that's the messaging. Men will say you're weak because you're crying. They'll say you're hysterical because you're crying. Women cry. Don't do that. Don't give it to them. Like there's so many different things that are all in play. And that's just that first panel. Like just that one space where all the things that she could feel and recognizes and is open about, like, this is where I am. All of these things are true, and I'm going to do my best not to do them. Again, the context of don't cry in front of the doorman because I might reveal something that I'm not supposed to reveal, undergirded by, and daddy said I shouldn't cry anyway. Oh, like that's so much that you almost appreciate the fact that she does give it away. Once she gets into the room by herself, she lets it go. It's not that she's so wholeheartedly embraces what her father said, where I'm not allowed to cry. It is, I can cry when it is safer to do so. You know, when it won't jeopardize bigger things. I can still compartmentalize my own emotions for the bigger picture, but I still recognize I'm gonna have to let this out. Like this is going to happen. Can I just hold on long enough so I can do it in a place space that I can control how it affects anybody else? And I mean, ideally speaking, even on the elevator, she could have cried. Nobody else is there. Nobody else could see it. But she wanted to wait into a space where she felt the most secluded, expecting no one to be there, ironically, and then allows the emotion out.
This is almost her fortress of solitude.
Literally.
It's like I have a love-hate response.
Let's go.
Yeah, because I was like,
This
I'm
can be a
listening to you,
both
I'm
and
like,
conversation, right?
Yes,
I was like, I'm
yes.
listening to you, I'm like, yeah, I dig that. And it's like, however, I'm
Yes,
also
yes.
thinking about the audience because
Mhm.
like you're intellectual enough to understand how complex this is, right? Like the responsibility of this person, the role that she has and all those other things. And I think about, okay, how adults ingest this versus how children do. And I think something that popped up in my head was this idea that when a parent passes away and the surviving parent has to take care of the child, and how they so often have to like or feel the need to present as strong, to present as I don't cry, to present as I'm not hurt, and the child misses the opportunity, the developmental opportunity to understand that they can experience feelings and emotion.
Where is the collection plate? There's got to be a collection plate around here somewhere.
So if I'm a kid looking at this, I'm like, oh, do I think that this person handled it the right way? I don't see the nuance of holding a secret or or anything kind of like deeper. It's just she didn't cry. She held it until she was all alone, and that's the only space in which you're safe, like you're supposed to cry. And you use the word safe, which I think is the appropriate word, but if a young person reads this, the only place I'm supposed to. And if a child, and especially working with kids, doesn't like would ever tell me like I only have this one fortress of solitude to be myself, to express myself, to feel my feelings, that means that the entire world is unsafe. So, so I have a love-hate relationship with this because it's like, yeah, it seems so intellectual in so many ways and so profound. And the first time I saw it, I was like, dang, they did a really good job. But then I was thinking, what would my 12-year-old self had said looking at this, knowing that there was a cancer diagnosis? I would have put on my best outfit and pretended it was okay when it wasn't. It wasn't okay. And one of the very first things that I say with one of my clients when they talk about something bad that's happened or traumatic that's happened, they're like, yeah, but it's fine. And I go, it's not fine. It's not. And they're like, no, I'm like, it's not. And then they're like, yeah, I know it's not. I'm like, that's okay to say it's not.
Right.
Because again, this is like the social parameter that we have, like when we have exchanges, regardless if it's at home or in the grocery store, of like, how you doing? Good.
I'm good.
Good. Everybody's always good 365 days of the year, even though we're not. It's this expectation that like we put on ourselves and others to be the best versions of ourselves or slightly less than the best version of ourselves most of the time. And I don't want unrealistic expectations for young people. Especially working with transitional age youth. They're allowed to be sad. They're allowed to honor their feelings. They're accountable for those actions that they have after those feelings, but they're allowed to honor them. And every space is a safe space. Like if you see somebody crying on the corner, they're going through something.
Right.
Sorry, they just are.
No, see, this Brittany bringing it.
Yeah, those are all great points because and we're gonna see in some of the things I've pulled out here, and I haven't pulled all of them out, but a lot of these issues are we're gonna see more of Lois's allowing herself more grace, right? I mean, as Victor said right here, all we really know is her what she says here about her background and when she was told it was appropriate to cry, right? And I really I think I want to put another multiple pins in what you said there, Brittany, about I guess witnessing to young people, right? I mean, the models that they get in their family, right? We talked earlier about family dynamics, family systems. I think I don't cry very often. I don't know how much of that is just individual. It's when I was younger, it was trying to force myself not to. Now, as I've gotten older, it takes a while for the dam to break, right? And I was it was probably about a month ago. I was up late watching a DVD, and something did trigger me. And I felt exactly what she was feeling, at least physically here. It was this weird experience where it's like I knew I had to cry. I couldn't quite. I wasn't purposely holding back, but it was this weird space. And then the dam finally broke. And then my older son comes in, and I've never told him not to cry. Yeah, I've never said anything about that myself. So now I don't know how much, but he couldn't handle that. Like he really was like he looked at me. He's like, "Are you okay? I gotta go," and he walked away. And I then later on I tried to have a conversation with him about it because I was like, "Well, is it just that he's seeing me in a space he's never seen?
Right.
Is he internalizing the toxic masculine shit that's out there, right? Because we can say what we want to our kids as best we can, but they're not just getting information from us,
No.
right? So, but I saw that later as a moment where I thought, no, I'm glad he saw me cry, and we're gonna have a continual, ever evolving conversation about that because I want him to know that it's okay, right?
Love that.
So, but yeah, this family thing, I'll just use it. I'll just move to the next panel if that's cool. Well, actually, no. So I'll talk about what happened in the middle of that.
Yes.
Because what, as Victor said, down here we see that little speech balloon, the only speech balloon on that page. Lois coming from inside. She comes in and she sees Ma and Pa Kent, and she sees Lana Lang, who was arguably, aside from like Wonder Woman, probably the most important romantics, then later becoming platonic relationship Superman has with a woman who knows both of his identities. So Lana knew, Wonder Woman knew, Lois knows. And I think aside from them, it's the Kents, right? And so this really is kind of a family unit here. And then we have more moments with them providing her a space to grieve collectively. And we'll get more of that through other issues. But the last thing I had from this issue itself was they decide to go together to essentially have their own funeral outside of Superman's grave, right? Because remember, Lois was there. The Kents were not. They were in Kansas. And Lana was wherever they were living, but separated from everybody else. I think she was with her husband, but I don't think he even knows that Clark is Superman. Right. So you kind of had like Lana and Lois kind of isolated in that regard, grieving Superman Clark in different ways, but in a way they couldn't share with anybody outside of whom they're flanking here, the Kents. And the Kents had each other, right? They couldn't share with others, the dual identity, but they did have someone next to them. And that moment was powerful for me. Before we move on to the rest of the page, we feel free to riff on what I just said.
So I think the interesting part that kind of plays into Brittany's point about the quote unquote safe place. The fact that Lois waited until she got to the apartment where she thought she was safe, her fortress of solitude, and it was filled with people. Like 3 other people who shared in her experiential grief. Like it became a community space for the uniqueness of their situation that was unintended. And luckily, Lois didn't retract her expression of feelings. She continued to give into it, as well as express and allow for the others to express their grief as well. And it's beautifully done in stages. She sees Ma and Pa Kent, embraces Ma Kent, continues to cry. And then Lana says something to reveal that she's there, which extends the experience a little bit more, so that it's not even just their secluded uh, sort of past present sort of emotional piece. You've got this very platonic but still loving perspective as well. You know, that's still just another addendum to everything. The only thing that would have been more amazing is if Wonder Woman had shown up too. You know, but she was busy reading mail, which is fair. So I think that there's something beautiful about what this final panel with Lois, you know, being called out sets up, and then this unified memorial completes. It is the understanding of, even when we feel like we're in this thing alone, it is possible to find the necessary components in other people, in other circumstances, to express our greatest grief and not have to do so in our darkest space of feeling alone. Because she says it, I am alone, so terribly lonely. And look at how that gets defeated by the revelation that Clark's parents are there and one of his oldest friends is there. And while they are unified in their grief of Clark, they are also unified in their celebration of him and the way that he impacted all of them and what their life will be after this without it. Like, that is all these different like puzzle pieces Tetris together to showcase this beautiful sense of community that can exist if you can be open to it. Now, if you're not in a place to be open to it, that's not a bad thing either. You're just not there yet. But to see that it can play out this way is absolutely beautiful. I will admit, when I first read this, I was younger. This is a couple months before my uncle passed. So this was part of the boring part of the Death of Superman storyline. Funeral for a Friend is so cerebral that as a child, and Brittany hit it spot on, I did not fully understand how great this was. I couldn't. It was too highbrow for where I was as a kid. Now, Death of Superman storyline proper, fight between Doomsday, yes, bring it on. I love it. This is awesome. This is amazing storytelling. This slowed things down to a place in space that it's clearly written by and almost for adults, not necessarily for kids. You are so spot on with that, that I had to give that admission, because when I was a kid, I would skip this. Like, I I read the words, but I didn't read the story. Like, I couldn't understand or comprehend that.
It's important. That's an interesting point you make there, Victor, because I think at this point in time in comics history, the target audience, the demographic that was buying it the most was like 13 was probably the youngest, going to about early to mid 20s. Right. So they are writing, essentially their general audience, all the people who are writing in the mailbag, you know, in their letters to the editor, the vast majority of them are emerging adults.
Yeah.
Or 20 somethings. You get the occasional letter where someone's like age 7 or age 12. But one thing I don't have it in here now, but I will drop it in the editing. The panel where I'd forgotten about this, the panel where you see Lana, the Kents know that she was there. So you get this, you know, close-ups with Lois and Ma and Pa, and they're hugging and they're talking. And then you see this last panel with Lana to the left saying, I hope you let me help. And then Pa's like, oh, we didn't know you're here, but you're welcome. And when you look at that panel, she's off the side, space-wise, and then Lois, Ma, and Pa are over here. So there is still this, like, I look at this now and I feel like this like sort of crazy tension right there. Like, is she intruding on a moment? Because even though they all share this, you know, it's like, even if you're friends with your exes, right? It's like when they meet, there's still that recognition of emotional resonance that's there. A little bit of awkwardness, you know, she's coming in and she's like, here's what was going to be their future daughter-in-law. Should I step in on this? You know, so I don't envy Lana in that moment. And right now, when I'm reading this, I feel like it took a lot of courage for her. Like, you know, just as it took a lot of courage for Lois to walk in that door, how much energy did it take for Lana to be like, do I break this moment? And I got no answer to that. But it just popped me this time. So
No, I think because I always took that as she came in after Lois did. Yeah, I always took it as that. But to that end, what I think is interesting is she doesn't ask. And that says a lot about Lana's personality. She says, I hope you'll let me go. But she doesn't actually ask them. And Lana is one that, by way of what they were talking about, and to get Clark's things in order, Lana is a part of that history of maintaining the secret that I think that she's earned the right of sorts to invoke herself into the situation rather than ask. Because theoretically, she is one of those things that has to be put in order. Like, if you look at the list, like one of the things that I always considered, and I don't think they actually did it, but the need to go through the list of people who knew that Clark Kent was Superman and contact them and say, do not say anything. I don't think they ever went through that specifically, but Lana would have been on that list. Lana would have been one of the ones where they go, we understand how you feel. Don't say anything. We need you not to reveal this because of what, that is a very important piece of this puzzle of maintaining this secret for all parties involved. There has to be, again, some collective congruence where we go, okay, we all understand that this is true, and we cannot tell people what we know. We have to maintain in some way, shape, or form this secret. Now, it's not that they actually have to, right? Like there's not specifically some sort of, I don't know, penalty that should come about if it's revealed that Clark Kent was Superman after he dies. I don't believe that there is one. I don't know that there's like, oh my God, I can't believe he won this award for writing this article about Superman. It was him the whole time. That's an ethical thing that I've never really kind of looked at. But the idea of getting things in order, I always considered that was something that they would have had to do, is contact those people that know Clark Kent is Superman, Superman is Clark Kent, Superman has died. That means Clark is dead, and you can't say anything.
They do have, if I recall correctly, they do have some conversation kind of like that later on.
Okay.
Or if not talking about, actually, that might have been part of it. Sorry, it's been a while since I've read. Right. Which means I need to read it again.
Yeah, we do.
I think it was something like they're like, okay, someone's going to figure out at some point in time, if they dig deep enough. So what do? Do we just beat them to the punch? Do we not? And I don't think there is really a good answer to that.
Right.
I do think it's interesting that that yes, they have to have that conversation, as you noted, but the fact that they didn't have to have it yet also speaks volumes to what you said earlier, Victor, about her sort of earning her place there. Because aside from the Kents, she was the first person to know, the first person that Clark came out to.
Yeah.
Before he went on to Metropolis, that he was. There's that tacit sort of trust there. I think is really, really powerful.
Right. But it makes you wonder, like, did Clark run it down to Lois, all the people that knew? Like, did he go, hey, listen, I love you, I want to marry you, but you're not the first person I told. Like, there's this girl from my hometown. Listen, I thought before I didn't even know you yet. Like,
the parallels to that conversation right there run so deep.
I'm just, like there's this thing where he's like, listen, before you, I have a thing for LLs. Okay, let me just be honest. I have a fetish for LL names.
Lori Lamaris, right?
You know what I'm saying? Do you see what I'm saying? It's one of the reasons why me and Lex Luthor have a very contentious relationship. I'm not saying, I'm just saying that I have a thing for LLs. I don't know what it is. The fact that my last name is actually pronounced L, I don't know. But I'll lay on the couch. We'll talk about it later. But did he actually reveal to her all the people that he was aware of that knew his secret before her? And was that part of the instruction? Like, hey, look, if anything ever happens to me, you got to contact these people and be like, hey. Or, we look at each other like wink and we just keep it moving. That's a very thoughtful measure that I would like to think that Superman thought about. But again, it also is considering his own mortality, which is not necessarily something outside of like kryptonite or red sun, energy that he necessarily had to worry about too often. But a very interesting sort of context of two people that were intending to join their lives together, with this potential secret being a cosmic reveal. I think there's kind of a sense of responsibility that he has to be like, hey, by the way, these people also know. So if something happens, you're not alone at the very least. Like there are people that you can talk to, or there are people that you need to talk to because they also know.
Let's before we wrap this up, I want to toss it to Brittany real quick because this made me think of something. This I there's the practical part that you mentioned there, Victor, but also I love that part you made about other people who know, so you're not alone, right? Brittany, can you talk a little bit about grief, and especially when people are grieving that involves secrets?
I feel like you guys I feel like we've had this conversation before we came on here, and I swear it's like not a setup. So I had two parts. Like literally one was about group and the other one was about secrets. Because although it's not exactly the same, I think about when a family member dies has death by suicide or an accidental overdose. There's sometimes secrets around that, whereas like, oh, this person passed away, and then we don't want to talk about it. Nobody wants to talk, like we don't discuss it in community settings because there's like a certain percentage of, I don't know, bias around specific losses. And so with the secrecy part, I think about, again, like we brought this word safety, right? Like, how safe can we be if we let it out? How unsafe will we be if we let it out, especially after the fact? So who's in danger after the fact, truly, if this were to come out? And then just looking at the first just like the scene with Lana and then like the Kenson, like I'm just thinking, for grief work, if you're going to do it, and if you actually do it, the very first step that a lot of people or grief therapists should recommend is group therapy. Group therapy, then individual, and then you can decide if you want to do family, and how that goes through. Solely because the group is going to give you not only community, but I see you, you see me. There is something collective in this room that only people with only bereaved people can experience. Only people who've lost a child will experience. Only people who have miscarried will experience. Only people who are orphaned at a young age will experience. I see you, you see me. At some point that fails to help. At the beginning, for the first, let's say 6 months, it really does support in that I'm not alone. That idea of I feel alone, but I'm not alone. So that's where we see that, like, all of them together. And I really do like that it is just them. It's a very tight unit. Like, here's something that we can talk about just beyond with ourselves. And the reason why it's only that kind of short period of time is because at some point it starts feeling like commiserating, of just sitting around feeling like we're just talking about the same sad stuff. And you're not better today. Cool. I'm not better today either. So, like, at some point, there needs to be some your own subjective experience of how you've lost somebody, because the Kents aren't the same as Lois. They're not. Like, the death of a child is very different than the death of a partner. It just is. And you can't quantify it as you've lost somebody, put them together, they'll be fine. And so that's why that individual work really does need to happen, just so that they can really try to identify what their barriers for change are. But this idea of secrets or kind of gatekeeping, as we were kind of talking earlier, specifically with grief, is like, I have this grief and it's mine. And so, or we have this grief and it's ours. And you can't understand. You won't ever understand. And sometimes that's a little true. Like as a young, 21-year-old, I was like, show me 21-year-olds with no grandparents and who's an orphan without a brother. Show me them. I'll talk to them, but I don't I don't necessarily, have the urge to talk to somebody who's just lost a grandma. Not that that's not important. It is. But this idea that we really do need to find our people, find our community in loss is essential in the healing experience, because you, as alone as you are, because you are alone, um it's it's necessary to be able to like try to pretend to thrive in the world without somebody that matters to you, right? Grief is like, you know, love, that the absence of love. So it's, I think that it's really nice that they again show the snowing, showering image, because it just symbolizes not only the coldness of loss, but it also shows that, again, this like view too, like looking down, like the purpose of them not being like, not seeing their faces like straightforward, is I am looking into the ground at something that is gone. Like there's very rare besides like in very small populations that burials aren't done low. And so again, this Western world of looking down is permanence, that I am going to walk away off this earth, or walk away from this spot in earth, and you will remain. And so I think that, and walk away together. So I think that that's important, that they have each other, and they have just, I don't know, like this communal loss as opposed to individual one, because it exists simultaneously.
Yeah, like no one is, we are solitary in our personal relationships and experiences with the deceased, right? And so no one is going to be able to 100% empathize with our loss, our space, but there is some communal aspects too that coexist, right?
Yeah.
And it's complicated, right?
Very much so. It's like a Venn diagram
Yes.
at best of circumstances and relationships, personalities, again, speaking from personal context, I have a sister with on my mother's side of the family, and my sister is more like my stepfather. I am more like my mom. And our relationship through our lives has been kind of shepherded by that similarity basis, right? Like the things that me and my mother either got along about or didn't get along about were very different than what my sister got along with my mother about or didn't get along with my mother about. And in the act of her passing, the ways that we kind of elevated in our positioning, I'll call it, of our family dynamic. My mom was a bit more of type A personality person that would be upfront and I'm going to handle this and I'm going to handle that. And when it came to helping to take care of arrangements, my stepfather, phenomenal man. I mean, classic country stalwart man. But in terms of handling things, when I came in, I was like, Dad, let me help this. Let me help you do this. He's like, thank you. Thank you, 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 thank you. Because it was quietly overwhelming for him. Like it was a thing that had to be done. He knew it had to be done. But here I am coming in volunteering to do it. And the joke that my sister has given is out of all three of us in this context, I'm the one that seemingly has been built to do this better than everybody else because my personality or whatever, my ability to come in, get it done, understand what's needed. Oh, we can do that. And then we'll come up with this plan and blah, 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 was a formation of my grief utilized positively and effectively to allow others to have their own presentation of grief by not doing. I'm hands off. I don't feel like it. Not a problem. I got you. And that sense of community, we're all grieving the same person, but how we do it and what we do in it, vastly different, very individualized. And I think that's the brilliance of what Brittani is talking about.
So you're Batman.
I mean, you've never seen us in the same room. That's all I'm saying.
This is
okay?
true.
You've never seen us in the same room.
Don't worry, Victor. I'll make sure and edit that part out of the.
No. Plausible deniability. I am saying you've never seen me and Batman in the same room. Am I? Am I not? Well, only my butler knows for sure.
There we go. So the rest that I have on this page really doesn't need a lot of dissecting, but I put it in here because this is an interesting pivot point in the narrative, right? So
Mhm.
up till this point in time, as Victor pointed out earlier, it's all been cognitive and emotional, um, characterization, interpersonal relationships. The only other real action part that happened, the only other fight, actually involves these assholes down here.
Mhm. Mhm.
um,
Mhm.
so back in, I think it was issue 2, yes, uh, Cadmus, who we've talked about before in the Death Arc, Westfield in particular here, the
Mhm.
director, said, "Okay, well, I'm taking Superman and Doomsday's bodies. I've got the clearance to take on alien remains and study them." And there was some tension. There actually was almost some firefights
Mhm.
that beat Westfield back. The president was never named, but it was Clinton,
Yep. Yep. Yep.
had to get involved and be like, no, 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 pick Doomsday, but
Yeah.
Superman is an American citizen, right? Um, so they're like, all right, we won't take him now. And
Right.
that's all he said, right? Now we have here, right? We get this low angle shot, which I think personally for me, because they're looking down, right, transitions nicely to what's going on under their feet.
Mhm.
So we get this person, uh, and then rather quickly though, it becomes clear that it's Cadmus and Westfield. So I
Mhm.
felt like this reveal was a little quick. Just personally, I feel like they could have stopped with these people taking him away, and of course you get that Superman symbol in the silhouette. But it's just very quickly, it's like, all right, come back to Cadmus. It's like, all right, just speed this up, skip to the end.
You do you know, or my theory, I'll say it like that, as to why that is because this is a return to this being a comic book. Everything else was very soap operatic,
Right.
right? The family dynamic of discovery of what to do about the situation with Superman, the other superheroes jumping in to um, handle the things that were espoused by the community as jobs for Superman. This is where it comes back to being the comic book with a villain, because that's the one part that is now missing from this equation. It is so very abstract and objective, or subjective, I'll say, in terms of people's emotions just kind of being the story, that we needed something a little bit more comic booky to ground the end of it. And that's why it was as much of a reveal as it needed to be here, because it does kind of have that like kind of ending for that reason to go. And by the way, this is still a comic book.
Yeah.
There's still going to be fights and tights sort of things. Even though like most of this issue has been purely emotional, clawing away at circumstances and revealing how people feel and expectations and all these wonderful things. Big shout out to the Andersons being brought back into the storyline when Wonder Woman shows up at the dad's house. Like all of those things are just so very emotional that I think these 4 panels is going like, hey, 10-year-old, remember the fight between good and evil? We're getting back to that.
And I want to bounce off of that too and just say, this is kind of what we were talking about earlier, right? Like past or present versus future.
Mm-hmm.
Tomorrow's going to come.
Mhm.
And the abruptness of it is funerals, let's say, happens on a Saturday, life's going to start on Monday all over
Mm-hmm.
again.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and it's a necessary evil that is real in the real world that, we can sit in the sadness. We can have lots of love stories. We can have lots of compassion for these characters. And yet,
Mhm.
tomorrow's still going to come. And it's like Victor was saying, this is still a comic.
Mhm.
There's still going to be the good and evil. There's still going to be fighting. There's still going to be something that pulls you back in outside of just its emotional center. Like it's
Absolutely.
great to have emotional growth. And this is, I mean, for the big kids, but we also need something fun and exciting that's something to look forward to for the littles and the bigs too. But I like he was saying, like it's important to understand not only cognitively, but emotionally that there's more. We
Mhm.
can't end here ever.
Well, and the creative team often has gone on record saying that really this was the key story, right?
Mm-hmm.
The death was just the prelude, and it was funeral, and then what ultimately became rain was the story they really wanted to tell. What happens to everyone else as life keeps life? right?
You guys, I want you guys to steal that.
Listen. We'll start paying $1 every time we use it. Like, just throw it out there.